Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with grilled root beer beef. That's right, I do not drink soda. So if I'm buying root beer, it's for one of two reasons. One would be I'm making root beer floats, which is not technically drinking soda, since it's being used as an ingredient in a recipe. And the second reason would be to use in a marinade, which is what we're doing today. And since I've only ever used this for lamb and never beef, I guess this officially counts as an experiment, and a pretty successful one at that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by adding a little bit of vegetable oil to this mixing bowl, followed by some freshly ground black pepper and some cayenne, but no little shake this time. We're going to go with a whole spoon, since heat and sweet always work so well together. And then we'll also toss in a little bit of chipotle. Speaking of heat, as you know, that is dried ground smoked jalapeno. Anyway, we will continue on with a little plop of ketchup, as well as a spoon of honey. And since I was adapting this lamb marinade for beef, I did reduce the honey amount a little bit, but in hindsight, we probably should have reduced it a little more. And I will review that and other decisions later. And then we'll finish this thing off with a generous amount of soy sauce. No, not low sodium. We need the sodium. So please use full strength. And then last but not least, the star of the show, 1 bottle of root beer. And then we'll take a whisk and give this a thorough mixing. And by the way, any old brand of root beer from the corner store is going to work. But if you can, maybe try to use one of those fancier brands, which tend to have a little more of a complex flavor, as well as being not quite as sweet. But anyway, that'll be up to you. The Yoda of cooking with soda, after all, you are. But anyway, we'll go ahead and mix that up and set it aside, while we move on to prep our beef. And today I'm going to be using a flank steak, but I'm pretty sure this marinade would work with many other cuts. And what we'll do to prep this is cut this lengthwise right down the middle, and then slice it across the grain in like 1/2-inch pieces. And in case you're not familiar, cutting across the grain simply means cutting across those fibers, which are super easy to see on flank steak. So what we'll do is simply cut it across those fibers this way into, like I said, 1/2-inch pieces. Okay, exact size doesn't really matter as long as you pick a size and stick with it. Although I will say for this technique to work, you don't want to go any thinner than this. And even though it might look a little odd, by cutting our beef in this method, we're going to be able to use a very interesting and effective technique for skewering these. So we'll go ahead and slice up our beef, at which point we can go ahead and transfer that into our root beer marinade. And I guess use our tongs to mix it thoroughly. Although if I wasn't filming, I would have totally done that with my bare hand, since that's faster, better, and feels surprisingly cool. And even though I'm calling this a marinade, it actually is going to act more like a brine, in that sugar in the root beer and salt in the soy is not only going to flavor the beef, but it's also going to help it stay nice and juicy. Or at least that's the plan. And then once we're sure that is thoroughly mixed, we'll cover that in plastic and marinate it in the fridge for anywhere between 4 hours and overnight. And I've done both and there's not a huge difference, but overnight you do get a little more flavor penetration. So we'll go ahead and transfer that into the fridge, like I said, anywhere between 4 and 12 hours. At which point we're going to pull it out and start to skewer. And the method we're using here is to basically fold each of these pieces of beef in half. Okay, so that skewer's going through twice. And by using this technique, not only are we producing something that's going to cook evenly, but it's also going to have a lot of surface area, which on a grill equals flavor. And maybe most importantly, it's going to look super cool once it's cooked. Oh, and a quick tip here, if you have any weird odd-sized pieces or small pieces, I will usually save those for the end. That way, if we don't like how they look after they're grilled, we can just pop those off and eat them. And our guests will have no idea that we took one for the team. And I should mention the amount of meat we're using here will make about 4 or 5 of these skewers, depending on how much you put on. But I'm only showing and doing 3 here, because I wanted to save some and experiment with a longer marination time. But anyway, once our flank has been folded and impaled, we are pretty much ready to head out to the grill. But first I wanted to recommend that you do not throw away any excess marinade. Since what I did, and what you probably want to do, is set that over medium heat and reduce it down to a glaze. Okay, contrary to what you may have heard, a marinade is always safe to use as a sauce as long as you cook it first. So I will simply reduce mine in a saucepan over medium heat until it looks a little something like this, which by the way will get even thicker as it cools. And then once that looks right, we'll just set that aside until our beef is grilled, which is the next and last step. So let's head outside, where we're going to place these over some glowing red charcoal. And the reason we want to use very hot direct heat for this is so we get some beautiful browning and caramelization on the outside before the inside gets overcooked and dried out. And if you cut your steak the same size and skewered it exactly like I did, this is only going to take about 3 to 4 minutes per side. And while many quote-unquote grill masters say only turn your meat once, I generally ignore that advice. All right, as long as each side gets about the same time facing the heat, you can flip it as many times as you want. And as far as judging doneness goes, it's going to be tough with a thermometer just because of the size and shape of these pieces. So I generally don't bother with that and go by feel. And if it feels really soft and mushy, it's still rare. And if it feels really hard, it's overcooked. So we're shooting for somewhere in between that. And basically when it goes past mushy and starts to spring back to the touch is probably somewhere between medium rare and medium, which personally for me is perfect. So that's how far I'm going. And as I mentioned, that took about 3 to 4 minutes per side. And once we've determined those have cooked long enough, we'll pull them off and head inside, where I have some very good news for you. We do not have to let this gorgeous meat rest. We can go ahead and immediately plate up next to a couple prop salads. And if we made one, which you should have, we'll go ahead and brush over our glaze. And then once our glaze has been brushed on, we'll go ahead and finish up with a little bit of toasted sesame seed. And for whatever reason, sesame is a perfect match for the flavor of root beer. And that's it. What we're calling grilled root beer beef is done. And looking very, very enticing if I do say so myself. So I'll grab a fork and knife and dig in to make sure it tastes as good as it looks. Which it totally did. But before I get to the flavor, let me talk about the texture, which was just incredible. And sure, it helps I didn't overcook this, but it really was beautifully moist and tender, and exhibited extreme juiciness. And as far as the taste goes, it is very, very close to one of those sweet, sticky bourbon glazes that you may have enjoyed at your friendly local strip mall casual dining establishment. I know that didn't sound like a compliment, but it was. So definitely on the sweet side, but at the same time, not one-dimensional. All right, there's lots of other stuff going on. Of course, having said that, next time I am going to eliminate or greatly reduce the amount of honey, since on this beef it seemed a little too sweet, whereas the more gamier lamb it seemed right on. And also I thought it might have needed a little more acidity. And how I could tell was I dripped a little bit of vinegar on, and it tasted better. Which, by the way, is how you check these things. All right, why guess when you can chew? So in the blog post, I will go over several tweaks I am considering. And if for whatever reason you end up not using the marinade, I still hope you give the cutting and skewering technique we used for the flank steak a try, since that worked out so nicely. But officially, I hope you do both, especially since you only need one root beer, which means you can use the rest of the 6-pack for ice cream floats. So for those reasons and many, many more, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.